right, so welcome back to another episode of Daddy Issues. Today we got on Raj, a good friend, and we'll let you kind of introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your situation.
Thanks. Well, I'm Raj Jathar. I'm a daddy, and I certainly have issues. So I think I'd be a good candidate to talk about some of them.
For sure.
Yeah.
I've heard some of your stories.
Yeah. Yeah. I've got some of my issues. I've got some combined issues. We got some of our issues. So there's just issues everywhere. But what are you gonna do? It's one of those things where if parents don't see eye to eye when it comes to matters of their kids, how they should be raised, right? Things like where they should go to school, their attitude, their outlook.
And I feel like that happens with every single family.
Right.
It just depends on how off,
Right.
those ideas on each side are.
It depends on yes, absolutely, how big the gulf is between both parents. It also depends on how willing both the parents are to compromise,
Yeah.
right? And to set aside what they think is the best route and what might be best for the child and kind of meet the other halfway. There's just so many things involved. It also depends on how planned the kid was,
Yeah.
right? If it's if it's a kid that comes out of a blue, if it's a miracle child that was never supposed to be possible, then chances are you haven't discussed any of this beforehand, right? And now you got to figure all of these things out on the fly, and kind of figure out that middle ground, come to some sort of a via media, all while raising the kid, and that leads to a lot of issues.
Oh yeah. Well, so what was an issue that you've had
Well,
that you guys couldn't see eye to eye?
so there are several. Starting with the with attitude, right? And it's funny because when my son was younger, right, when he was a child, it actually served to, we're very different people.
Yeah.
And it served to unite us because we were both crazy about our kid, and that's the one thing that we had in common. And it was so strong that it allowed us to put all of our differences aside.
Yeah.
And we both loved being a family and it being all three of us, and it worked out great to some extent. And of course, I'm oversimplifying, I'm glossing over a lot of things. It wasn't all perfect and wasn't all roses, but it worked.
Yeah.
And but that was at a time when about all you had to do was feed him and bathe him and change him, right, and put him to bed and burp him maybe
Yeah.
when he was even younger.
And with that too, when you have like a newborn or a baby, you're also looking at it, or I think you'd be looking at it like you're growing, things can change. Like, I love my family, wait till we get older, things might get better and
Yeah,
blah, blah, blah.
yeah,
But then
yeah,
on and on
yeah.
and on, it's still
Yeah.
not changing. It's still not getting better.
Yes, absolutely. And there is a tendency to, hey, maybe this will fix itself.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe I might be different in a couple of years. The kid might be different. She might be different. All three of us might kind of grow into something.
Right.
So there is that temptation to put things off or hope that things kind of fix themselves. And they do actually sometimes. But at least in my case, and I think I've seen that in others as well, that certain things that you're the most divergent on, you actually grow even further apart, right? And it's unfortunate, but the thing that served to unite you then starts to become a wedge between the people.
Right. Well, do you think
Right.
that's like resentment building and building and building? Like every time maybe you're giving in to them with their thoughts? And
There is, absolutely. So there is an element of resentment that starts to creep in, born off the frustration
Yeah.
from not being able to either drive your point home, not being able to, of course, this is all perception, right? And perception is reality to some extent. Not being able to get the other person to see what you think is the right way
Right.
to do things. And even if it's not the right way, then it's the preferred way. right? Trying to get the other person to understand that you're not asking for those things for your sake, right? You're asking for those things for what you think to be the best thing for your kid's sake,
Yeah.
right? So there's an element of like, hey, we may not be on the best of terms right now, but don't do that on my account, right? Set it aside and think about this from the kid's perspective, right? Which is where I'm coming at this from.
Yeah.
I'm not doing this because I enjoy it. I'm not doing this because this is something that I want or like. This is something that I think the kid needs, right? And so
Now,
that's why.
I'm 100% with you on that. But do you think in their mind as being the ex or whoever you're in the relationship with, your significant other, do they think that? I mean, they have to think that they're also being right and that they're thinking about the kid and it's not them.
Yes. But if that's the case, okay, then let's talk about it. And let's talk about it in the kids' terms.
Yeah.
Right? Let's not talk about, oh, well, you want this and you want, no. Right? And so I've always been open to a conversation about, and don't get me wrong, she's been right on a lot of things.
Yeah.
Right? In the beginning, for example, I was worried about the fact that he wasn't giving up the bottle, and people would tell me that conventional wisdom means you got to wean them off of it by a certain age and blah, blah, blah. And I had my friends and family kind of feeding me that conventional wisdom, and I had concerns about that, and she was very calm about it. No, I'm telling you, when he's ready,
Yeah.
he will give it up himself. And sure enough, he did.
Yeah.
Just one day, it was gone. Without us having to do anything.
Yeah.
So, that's just a very small example, but there's been others too, where she's read the situation and she knew what our kid was going to do better than I did, and I was worrying for no reason. I was also, as a first-time dad, I worried about everything.
Right.
in the
And you're only
beginning.
getting information from other parents.
Right, exactly.
You're not,
Right,
yeah.
And so that's one thing that I evolved to do less of as well, which is to not cling on so tightly and not try to control every aspect of the kid's life,
Yeah.
and to let some of these things go, and just kind of take their own course. But to come back to the original point, the yes, there can be. I've always been open to that conversation if we're talking about what's better for the kid. But very often, what ends up happening is that when you're not on good terms, right? The minute I open my mouth, immediately it's like, oh, he's talking, and then there's a shield or a screen that goes up. And if I say that to somebody from her friends or her family, and they say the exact same thing back to her, all of a sudden she's a little more amenable to it,
Right.
because it's not coming from me, and there's not that immediate wall that goes up,
Yeah,
right?
that makes
And and who knows? I might have done the same thing.
Yeah.
I'd like to think not. I'd like to think that I'm very pragmatic and I don't let those things color my judgment. And when it comes to these things, I try not to be emotional about them and try to be as pragmatic as possible. But it's tough, man. It's tough to set what you feel for each other aside, right? And talk just about the kid and what you think is good. And it's also tough when one of the parents feels like the other parent herself is a kid.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
You're taking care of two kids.
taking care of two kids, essentially. The only difference being that one of the kids is running the asylum.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's kind of.
I feel like in your situation, you weren't heard a lot. Like when you said something or did something, you were working, you were kind of paying the bills and having everything happen. But I feel like, I mean, you guys, from when I met you, you guys have been in a lot of like arguments and fights and stuff like that. But it almost doesn't seem like real on her when she would explain it or something, because it's like you're not living in the reality. Like this isn't real life. This isn't what's happening.
Well, and that goes to what we were talking about earlier, right? Is the differences if you're very different people,
Yeah.
right? And one person is very pragmatic, and one person is very cerebral and kind of down to earth, and the other person tends to be a little bit more flighty, and a little bit more, I don't know, just kind of floating from one stage of life to another, or from one situation to another.
Yeah.
That it makes it hard to do anything. It makes it hard to raise a kid. It makes it hard to run a house. It makes it hard to run a business. And these are all things that we have clashed on.
Love your business
That
story.
we that we have. We because of how little that we had in common. Now, one of the things that I perhaps could have done a bit more or less of is that I tended to take the high road a lot, right? Just because, first of all, I'm generally speaking, I'm not confrontational.
Yeah.
I know that if she was here, she'd probably roll her eyes because, and not just her. I'm sure a lot of people see me as being, in fact, very confrontational, exactly the opposite. The truth is, I really don't, know,
Right.
and I avoid it as much as I can. It's just when I feel like I'm not, there is no other option,
Yeah.
right? That's when. But coming back to, generally speaking, again, because I'm not confrontational, I always wanted to give it, not wanted to, I always ended up giving in and giving in and giving in, right? And I thought that I was doing this, and this was the best thing that I could be doing for all three of us. And to some extent, it is. And I'm going to,
By giving in.
by giving in,
Yeah.
I'm going to step aside for a moment, and I'll come back to this point. Speaking of giving in, I don't think that parents who give in get enough credit for giving in.
Right. Yeah.
Right? It's tough because you're doing something you don't want to.
Exactly.
You're doing something that you don't think is the right thing to do, but you're doing it to keep the peace because you think that costs more than not doing what you think should be done.
Yeah.
Right? The confrontation and the fallout from it.
But now you doing that for 20 years.
Yeah.
You were in a relationship for 20 years.
Yeah.
And then essentially you guys.
I think I gave in a little too much.
Right.
There are points where I think that it might have made more sense, and I perhaps should have put my foot down. That I perhaps should have, even if it meant us butting heads, and even if it meant things getting.
But do you
a
think that
little-
would have kept the relationship together if you?
I think that I would have been a little.
Because
who
I
knows?
think it could have been build up on your end, being so frustrated for 20 years
Yes,
going through that.
yes. Who knows?
Yeah.
I think that whether things might have ended up differently or not, I think that certainly, things would definitely would have ended up differently. Whether we'd still have been together or not, who knows? But I really do think that there is something to be said for in certain cases, standing your ground, and if it means butting heads, if it means confrontation, if it means that things go south for a little bit, in certain cases on certain issues, like the finances, like the runaway spending, like the not having a plan or a budget or a handle on things, those aren't necessarily things that you should be giving in on, and
Right.
I did, unfortunately.
But the hard thing with that too is, I mean, because I know your situation and what you went through, but with the finances and the business and all that stuff, it's just like, it was almost like there was she wasn't in reality. She was kind of just doing whatever, and you were stuck with the consequence of either paying those bills.
Right, and which is why this is what I mean about, I should have.
Right. You should You should have
yes.
corrected that right then.
Yeah.
But and this is when you go to the business and then you were essentially doing the books and you're like, wait, this isn't right because we should be making money. How aren't we?
I was the only person in that whole establishment, and we had 25 to 30 people on our payroll, and I was the only person there not making money.
Right.
And this went on for 5 years.
Yeah.
Right? My entire life savings, my credit in the toilet, right? These are all things, you don't give in on those things. And unfortunately, I did.
Yeah.
But it was also the first time that we were doing that together. And there was still hope that we might be able to dig ourselves out of that hole.
Right.
Right? And then come to find out one day that the business has just been given away, like literally given away for absolutely nothing other than the assumption of debt, which I also didn't know. So these-
that was the tough thing though, because there's been it was a lot of secrets and a lot of not telling you what's going on or telling you something different, and it was a different result.
Yes, and here again, to be fair, there have been secrets on both sides, and I sure as heck have had my share of them. So I'm not claiming to be blameless in this, but yes, there wasn't full disclosure, and I could have pushed for it. I could have asked for it. One of many things that I should have taken some of this by the reins rather than taking a step back and just kind of let it unfold.
But now, what kept you in the relationship for that long? Because to go through that a couple different times and to go through all those things, how do you still stay in a relationship that's just not on your side?
I wish I could. There are times that I myself, I'm looking at myself going, and
But I think, was it your son? Keeping the
it's my
family
son,
together.
Huge part of it.
Yeah.
Right, but then as he gets older, right, and now he's almost an adult, right, and he's somewhat independent. That takes less and less.
Right.
It in some cases it's less of a factor. In some cases, it's more of a factor.
Well, it happens with a lot of parents. Is they'll stay together in convenience of the child, but when he turns 18 or when he's 19, 20, when he goes off to college, they kind of are like, oh shit, now it's just me and you. Well, I don't even like you, and they go to separate ways.
Unfortunately, I have seen this. There are at least two couples that I know of pretty well, who went through that, where the kid came of age. And they realized, the kid was really the glue holding them together.
Yeah.
And unlike us, they didn't go through separation and getting back together, and separation and getting back together. They were pretty much together, and in some cases, it seemed like this was the perfect couple and the perfect family and things like that. And so to me, I was stunned to hear that something that I thought was perfection and paradise, 18 years later, 19 years later, was done, and done without much fanfare. I mean, they just, in one case, they just talked about it and
See, that's almost better, because they're probably friends now, but they were the love wasn't there. They were over it. But that's I mean, that's almost better.
Yeah. Yes. And so, to your point about what, there's definitely a part of me that will always love her.
Right.
Right. That'll never change. Even though I call her a pain in my ass, and she does her best to be one. But and I kind of like these folks. I thought that over time, and with her doing her best to beat that out of me, that it would be gone. But no, it's still, and this might to some extent subconsciously come back to the kid, right? Because I love him to death, and he's the most important thing to me. And
but also spending 20 years of your life with being with a person, knowing their intimate things, doing all those things, you have love for them.
Exactly. And I see how he looks at her.
Yeah.
Right. And he's still very much Mama's boy.
Yeah.
Even though he listens less and less to Mama these days, much to her chagrin. I think it's a bunch of a lot of things, and that to some extent is why we've been in this kind of death spiral for the longest time.
Are you happy that you're out of it now?
Well, there's pros and cons, right? There's no perfect situation, right? When I was in it, there was plenty of things that made me unhappy. When I was out of it, there were plenty of things that I wasn't happy about, right? So country music has this really great line where this is a song that says that I'm so miserable without you, it's like having you here.
Right. Yeah, I've just been getting my country on with Lil Kane Brown. That's about it.
And for the longest time, that was us.
Yeah.
It was literally with or without you.
Yeah.
I'm miserable with you. I'm miserable without you.
I mean,
it's
she
like,
would even say when she came into the restaurant, she's like, I hate him so much, but I love him. I miss him when he's not here. So it's like, it's tough, but
it is. And between the business and practically bankrupting me, between the dogs I'm allergic to that I said we should never have, and yet we had them. I got asthma, from it, lost
That story's
15% of
wild.
my lung capacity. I mean, I could just go on and on. And again, I'll say this over and over. I'm no angel. There's
Yeah.
plenty of blame to go around. I've done some shit too. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I'm perfect. But she sure as heck did her part to
Right.
beat that out of me.
Yeah.
And yet somehow I found myself whenever she was in need,
Still helping out.
that
Yeah.
there's something about I could be pissed off as all hell and be like, I'm never talking to her again, well, that's it. This is it. This is the last straw, and then that face appears and all of a sudden, it's just, yeah, it's hard to explain, but yeah, there's plenty of things that in hindsight, I wish that I hadn't given in quite as easily
Yeah.
as I did. And who knows, she probably wishes that as well, because there are a lot of things that, we were kind of learning on the fly and we didn't know at the time. There were certain things she knew more than I did and that I had to learn. There's certain things I knew more than she did,
Yeah.
and that she had to learn. I hope she did. There's parts that she still hasn't learned
Right.
20 years later,
Yeah.
which is a large part of why we're not together right now. But there are signs, and some people just get to things later in life. I mean, this is a lot later in life,
Yeah.
but hey, as long as it's getting there, it's better late than never. But it was literally like having two kids.
Oh,
you
yeah,
know?
yeah.
Yeah.
Now, was there any getting back to the daddy issue part of it?
Yeah.
Like in my case with my kids, was there any? What did you have you guys when you guys broke up? Earlier on or whatever, and then got back together. When you broke up, did she take the child? Was there any did you ever have to go to court for this situation or anything like that?
Yes, and in fact, I found out recently that our court case is used as a precedent in New Hampshire case law, that they cite this now because it was the first of its kind. But it was 2 years all the way up to the Supreme Court of my life, 2.5 years that I will not get back, and who knows how many tens of thousands of dollars. But essentially, and mind you, I feel like I'm raking up the past over here because of how long ago it was. But it was a milestone, right? It was a
And you
turning
guys
point in
have
my
never
life.
been married either.
Right.
So just been together for 20 years.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the I wanted to take my son back to India to visit with my mother, uncles and aunts, his uncles and aunts, my uncles and aunts, and I say uncles and aunts as in like cousins and things like that, my cousins. So, a lot of extended family over there. And again, it was a very different time. She's a very different person from the person that she was then, and just wasn't having it.
Did she think
Right.
you were going to take him there and not come back? Because essentially,
That
as a
was-
mom, you have no
that
rights.
That was the claim.
Yeah.
I don't know.
She was trying to.
I don't know how much of it was true or not.
Yeah.
Right, but that was the. But the lower court sided with me, saying that yes, there is always that risk, but you have to weigh it against the value of the kid, seeing his extended family on the dad's side. How dad grew up in dad's world
Yeah.
before he moved over here. So that has a lot of value and weighed against the somewhat minimal risk of dad suddenly turning loopy, right? And
Staying in India.
staying in India, leaving everything that he's worked so
Right.
hard to build over here, for no apparent reason,
Yeah.
just throwing that away, right? And deciding it didn't make a lot of sense. I mean, there is a risk, but you got to, again, as the court said, weigh against that. The higher court also sided with that decision. And they stipulated that 90 days beforehand, I have to let the other parent know that of my intention to take him back, and then 30 days beforehand, there has to be a full itinerary, and so the minute the decision was upheld, I immediately decided, okay, I'm not going to waste any time. It's been 2.5 years. I'm going to take him back home.
So when that got filed, you had to wait 2 years to even go. You had to wait for the court case to
yes,
be over
because
with. Right. Wow.
it kept going for 2 years because it went from the lower court. It
Yeah.
was appealed to the Supreme Court, the New Hampshire State Supreme Court. So it took a good 2 years or more. I forget exactly.
Jeez.
Yeah, and so I wasn't wasting any time to take him back home. Now the court had stipulated that I give her the itinerary so that she can come as well. Now, at the time, of course, she was not able to fund her own travel.
So let me ask this question first.
Yeah.
Because you obviously had to pay for your attorney. Did you pay for her attorney?
No, I did not.
Oh, thank God. Because
But
I was
I
like, you're
did-
just paying to
But
fuck
I did.
yourself.
I did pay for the tickets.
For her to fly.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
and for 3 weeks of the hotel, 5-star hotel.
And you guys obviously are not together at this point.
Right. But picture this, right? After everything, okay, talk about taking the high road. It's me, the kid, and her flying to India.
Wow.
Just within weeks of this happening.
And mind you, I can only imagine that's not a cheap ticket. And then to put her up for 3 weeks in a hotel.
5-star hotel. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So,
You are a good man because I could never.
well, in certain ways. Again, I'm no angel. I've done a lot of shit I'm not proud of. But yeah. So this is an example of giving in that was perhaps a good giving in.
Yeah.
Right. If I had it to do over again, I would give in to that just to have, because I know that he wouldn't have enjoyed his trip to India because he was
Right.
still about yay high without Mama, who
Yeah.
was absolutely tight to the hip, and I would every night when it got to be late and it was time to go to bed, I would take him to the hotel and I would drop him off
so you could sleep
to the
with.
so
Yeah.
they could stay with her,
Yeah.
and then I would pick him up in the morning and I would bring him and then we would spend the day together.
It's so confusing too for a kid to, especially that young, because he probably doesn't understand what's happening. Like, oh, mommy's on this trip with us, but we're not actually hanging out with her.
Right.
But I'm seeing her every once in a
But
while.
I think he was kind of used to it just
Yeah.
because of how much.
And you guys
Yeah.
got back together after that.
Yeah.
So or
Yeah.
years after, whatever.
Yeah, we did. We got back together and then we didn't, and then we did again,
Yeah.
and yes, it's this.
So it's almost like it was normal for him maybe to see that growing up.
Yeah, it didn't, at least on the surface of it, he didn't seem to question it. He didn't bat an eyelid. He was just like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, for better or for worse, that's how it was. I mean, I joke that we're a binary star system.
Yeah.
At least I did. And that, binary star systems circle each other for their entire lives. and they get closer and closer till they finally spiral in on each other and annihilate each other.
Yeah.
So that was my running joke for the longest time, is that we're just gonna run into each other and annihilate each other.
I mean, being an outsider of your guys' relationship and seeing how you guys, I mean, when you guys would fight and it would just be like, holy shit, what is going on here? Like,
Yeah.
how are these two still together? And it's
Oh,
this
yeah.
bad, you know?
Yeah, and it's one of those things. Again, I wish I knew, because every time if I had a dime for every time in the past that I and not just said to myself, I wasn't trying to brainwash myself.
Yeah.
I literally felt like I'm never ever going to talk to this person again.
Right.
And then
And somehow.
I run into her, or she shows up, and and all of a sudden it's like that never happened.
Yeah.
It's just it's hard to explain.
Yeah.
But and every time I think that she cannot do anything
Lose
to
you back.
she cannot possibly do anything beyond what she's already done to infuriate me.
Yeah.
She finds a way.
Yeah.
It's just this is something I would joke about as well. It's literally like she was designed and programmed from birth to needle.
Yeah, and I can
doesn't
vouch for that. I've
yeah.
heard some crazy,
Because she doesn't.
situations.
I really don't even think she means to.
Right.
She's not doing this maliciously. She's not a malicious person.
Yeah.
She's actually really sweet. She just doesn't, on certain things.
Doesn't think it's like the wrong thing to do, or like just doesn't think about it.
Yeah, it just doesn't occur. Then this goes back to the whole child thing,
Yeah.
So yeah. Like in the same way that a child might, burn a wad of cash and go, oh, what? I didn't know what I was doing.
Right.
I mean, that's a terrible example, but
Yeah.
that's the level at which it sometimes I go, wait, how could you not know
Right.
that this is not a good
Well,
idea?
because of you, because
guess,
of
yeah.
she never had that responsibility, never had that. You were
Yeah.
always the one doing those things,
And maybe you're right about that, but yeah, but
you built a monster. You created her.
that no No, there was already
was
that
already
that yes. So because believe it or not, for all of my giving in and indulging in things like that, it was slumming compared to the life she used to lead. Okay.
Oh.
So she took several steps down when she came to my freaking cerebral
Yeah.
broke ass. You know. Wow.
The best story I love to tell is the one of her cooking and how you're from
Oh.
India and you make the joke about you're from a third world country. You tell it.
It keeps me on my toes. Every time I go back home, my friends they'll wash their hands with bottled water and things like that, just because they're so afraid of getting sick, because they've been here for so long and they don't have their immune system isn't what it used to be. And I used to joke about, I'll never have that problem because I will always be eating her cooking. And so my immune system will always be on its toes, because who knows what Franken meal I'm going to be
Oh man.
having next. So, but even that, to be fair, has improved.
Yeah.
So who knows? Maybe when we're 100, we might get to where we should have been 50 years
Get
ago.
back together.
Oh, I wasn't even thinking that.
I was gonna say I'll be there. Oh, Rush.
So, but yeah, it's never a dull moment. That's for sure. The funny thing is that my son is starting to do and say some of the same things that I used to,
Oh.
because he's definitely part me and part her. So he's part pragmatic and part while being part flighty and part head in the clouds
Yeah.
kind of thing. And the look on her face
When he says
when he
something?
says something like that, because it almost it's a look of like, et tu brute, that she feels betrayed. and,
Yeah.
and yeah, I get the biggest kick out of it,
Oh,
because
you have to.
because I know it's not betrayal. It's not like he's taking sides or anything. He's just spouting what he thinks makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. And it seems like it makes sense to most of the world.
Everyone but you.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I'm just glad that I'm at a point now where I can laugh about this stuff,
Right.
because
Yeah.
it was not like that
Yeah.
years ago, and it was pretty. I mean, I would just walk around and I was always in a foul mood, and I was always frustrated, and I was always pissed off about all of those things, right? Not being able to get through, and always having to give in, and never having my voice heard, or I would do something and then she would undo it. All of that stuff would really. I was not a very happy person, and a lot of it was also, again, to be fair, a lot of it was me trying to control every aspect of it, right?
Yeah.
Me thinking that that if we take even one wrong step, right?
But in
yeah,
fairness,
yeah,
you're the one on the back end dealing with all the issues. Like, she'll create it, but then you're dealing with it.
Right.
So that's you being like, no, I already know what's going to happen.
yes, absolutely. So those aren't things that I should have given in
Yeah.
to. But certain other things, when it came to my son, where I wanted to control every aspect of his life,
Okay.
and I for good, and my constantly worrying about if every single minute of his life is not the best possible minute that it
Yeah.
could be, that somehow I was doing him a disservice, and somehow he would be irreparably damaged.
But that's also how you grew up. You grew up. I mean, you grew up in India?
Yes.
So it was
There's-
much different than America.
Yes,
Probably a lot
and-
stricter family.
Yes, and there was absolutely
Yeah.
priorities are different. The way kids are raised is
Yeah.
different. It's a whole different culture, right? It's a whole different attitude and outlook and way of doing things, and so I had to temper that with the fact that he's being raised in this country, but I do still think that I might have gone a little too much in the direction of trying to and worrying about not giving him the best possible life,
Yeah.
right? And not realizing that kids are pretty resilient, right? And it's okay to F up as a parent. Every parent does that, as long as you learn from it and you try really hard not to repeat your mistakes. It's okay to do that. But I was just so worried, almost to the point of being paranoid of taking the wrong step, right? And worrying about, this could harm him for the rest of his life, and just things that I probably shouldn't have been as worried about, and getting angry and frustrated about. So I made my peace with a lot of those things, and life just becomes a lot better when you realize, hey, you want to control everything, but there's really only a handful of things that you can control, right? So control whatever you can and do the best with whatever you cannot.
And at the end of the day, you just want what's best for your son, you know? But so what's some advice that you would give another father out there, maybe not going through the same situation as you, but just for a father and a son maybe, or a father and a daughter, what's some advice that you would give to a parent maybe going through a breakup or something?
Oof, that's...
or what's some fatherly advice?
Well, so if you're going through a breakup, it's unfortunate, and I would wish anybody going through that strength, but there will be differences. Even the most compatible of couples have differences. The most compatible of parents have differences. And so going back to, I feel like I talked a lot about giving in, but I'll do that one last time. It's okay to give in, and it's actually better. It's hard as hell to give in, right? There's this story, I think it's in the Hebrew Bible, of Solomon, and these two mothers come to him with a baby, both claiming that the baby is theirs. And the wisdom of Solomon, he goes, well, I'll tell you what, carve the baby into two, and you guys each take one half. And one of the mothers immediately goes, no, let her have the kid. And Solomon turns around and says, that's the real mother, because the real mother would never allow for that to happen. And so, so there is something to be said for giving in, right? For the sake of the kid primarily, but even from your own for your own sanity, because to just constantly be fighting about everything is not the best thing. But now that said, I'm going to take the other side. Something that I learned. It's not always the best thing to.
So what do you take out of that?
Pick and choose. Yeah. Don't give in on the finances. Don't give in on things that could affect all three of your future for the rest of the. But when it comes to school and when it comes to, I don't know, church or other things, it's okay. Give in. When it comes to college and SATs and all that good stuff. Or what he should wear, or what time he should go to bed, and those sorts of things. It's if you have differences there, what he should eat. That was a bone of contention as well. To whatever extent you can, give in, man. It's just not worth it. It's not worth it. The kid's gonna end up okay, and you'll have a lot more of your hair left, right? by giving in, instead of by not getting stressed out, by not getting frustrated over, I can't believe,
it looks like you've already been.
Exactly.
You're done. You're all done.
So I can't believe it. I wanted him to be in bed by 9 o'clock, and it's 10 o'clock, and he's not in bed.
Simple things like that.
Things like that. Yeah. It's believe it or not, all of that stuff, right? It's like death by 1,000 paper cuts. It by itself, in isolation, it's not a big deal, right? But it all adds up. So just let it go, So I guess that's really what I would say.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on. It's a good episode. And thank you, guys. We're out.